This is a cheap Sanyo Boombox that I got a while ago. It's pretty cheap. Anything with a 4-band graphic equalizer, like an even number of bands, is cheap. That's just evil. Where's the model number on this? I don't even think there's a model number on the front. Well, whatever. Trust me, it's cheap. Cassette deck doesn't work. It's got mechanical issues. Besides having a noisy motor and needing a new belt, the mechanism's all bent out of shape. So if I hit play, the pinch roller doesn't actually touch the capstan, and this whole mechanism doesn't move up enough. And sometimes the clutch inside this will slip, and it's junk. So what I'm going to do is take this cheap $5 USB powered Bluetooth receiver and build it in, so when I hit play, Bluetooth turns on. Let's get started. Here's the model number for anyone interested. It's an M9825. I believe this was available also in silver. This is the black edition. It looks like it has detachable speakers, but oh no. Most boomboxes have a detachable power cord. Oh no. Okay, now we're inside. You can see what a cheap setup it is. This is your main everything circuit board. It's got a couple wires that come off to the motor and tape mechanism. These two come from the AC power supply that's attached to the back of it, just black and red for power, whatever DC voltage that is. And then you have a little LED board for the indicators. I think that's also an LED. It's got good sized speakers. They don't sound very good. Maybe I could add some insulation or something to get rid of the plastic tinny sound. Yeah, okay. So what I want to do first is I want to check what voltage I'm getting on the motor to see if that's something that I can use and easily convert to 5 volts. Alright. It's that wonderful motor. Getting about 10.5 volts. A 7805 regulator should be able to handle that. Not sure how warm it'll get. I might have to put a little heat sink on it, but we can test that out. Look at that. Snapped right off. So that's a fail. On to salvage part 2. This is a broken camera, and it has a 7805 on here as well. So take 2. So here's that 7805. This one actually did remove successfully and not snap. Excuse the horrible soldering job. This is all temporary. So I've got the center pin, which is ground, just tied to the ground on the chassis here. And that's all tied to ground all the way back. I pulled the pink wires, which are the 10.5 volt power for the motor. And this other pink wire here goes to the switch for the play mechanism, which goes back here and tells the amplifier to turn on. So then I have that going to the left pin, which is voltage in, the yellow wire, and then the green wire comes out. It's going to my multimeter. I also have the multimeter grounded. So let's see what it looks like. Very nice. Now the question is this going to get too warm with the current draw from that little Bluetooth adapter stepping the voltage? Because you're going to dissipate 5 volts, and whatever the current is, so your current times voltage, that's the power that's going to be dissipated through here. So 5 volts times whatever current that little adapter provides. So this could be dissipating, let's say, up to 2.5 watts as I think since it's USB, it's probably using the cheaper USB spec, which is 500 milliamps, like the original spec. So that's really not too bad. Setting these up is really easy. These two pieces of plastic just click together, and then you have your circuit board. And it's all a bunch of tiny surface mount stuff, but luckily your 3.5mm audio jack and USB, even though they're surface mount, they have fairly large pads, so it should be pretty easy to remove them and solder to them. I was originally going to hook up an external LED. You can see where that, let me flip this around. On the right hand side of the board there's the LED and the resistor for it. But desoldering that is one thing. Soldering a wire to that that's not going to rip the pads right off, I'm not going to bother. I'm going to find a way to hide this unit somewhere behind the dial, the tuning dial, to get a bit of blue LED when this powers on and pairs, because this flashes for pairing and goes on solid when it's enabled. I've ordered a ton of these. I use them for like old radio in the kitchen. You want Bluetooth? Boom. Old iPod dock, Bluetooth, done. Especially the old iPod docks, because they'll actually have 5 volts on the 30-pin iPod connector to charge like the newer iPods. Well, newer, the USB iPods. So it's real easy to retrofit one of these in. And, you know, for $5, it sounds good enough to me. I'm sure I'm sure it has some noise and stuff, but when you're just dealing with old junk like this, it's more than adequate. So yeah, I'm going to remove this, and for now I'm just going to plug the audio into these speakers over here and just test to see if it works. There we go. Desoldering complete. And looking at this, the outer pins are power. You can see the one at the top there is ground. It's connected to the ground plane. And the one on the bottom is 5 volts. I double checked this against the connector just to make sure. But yeah, that one going to that little via there, that little trace, that's power. Just going to tack the power wires on. Alright, this mess just got messier. I soldered, let's take a look here. I went and soldered the power here. Got ground and power. Wherever possible, I like to solder a nice through hole rather than just tacking it onto the face. So ground's there to the ground plane, power. The green wire runs to the 5 volt out on the 7805 over there. And I just tacked the ground in here. And running this for a bit. It is currently in pairing mode. I don't have anything connected to it, so it's flashing. I've run it a few times, and this is warm. It's warm, I can hold it. So I think what I'm going to do is just attach it to this ground here. Since this metal piece is attached to the middle pin, it's grounded. So I'll use this as the ground going to the radio 10 volt power supply. Then I use the middle pin, these two pins here, white and green, to power the Bluetooth adapter. And that way it can use this big sheet of metal as a heatsink. So I've got play going, and let's just grab a phone. And I've already paired this, so we don't have to worry about any difficult stuff. So I can just turn Bluetooth on. Pad. Every single one of these I order says H163. That's the name of it. And I can just play some music. And right now I just have it coming through these. The next step is to intercept. These are the audio cables going to the cassette deck head. Alright, well, I've skipped ahead a bunch, and I'll kind of show what I've been doing. Cleaned this up, mounted it here, but I think I might be going a different route than the 7805. What I've found is this has a lot of noise. A lot of noise. And I know using these I've heard it a little bit before, but this amp is hot. Like, hot. especially on the cassette side. You turn the volume up 1/4 of an inch with nothing on it, it's just hiss and noise. So plugging into those audio cables coming from here was no good. Just way too loud. Even putting some resistors as a voltage divider on it, it's too much. So then I tried tacking in, that's the, where's my finger? That's the volume, that's the balance control. So on the pre-volume, the preamp side, tried tying the audio in, and it sounds great. It's the right level, but yeah, lots of noise. So there's two options: isolate the ground on the power supply, which I don't have any parts to do, or isolate the audio. So I just tried hooking up this isolation transformer I had kicking around, and because of that I had to tie the ground, because now the audio is isolated, so the ground from the audio needs to be tied to the ground in here. But when I do that, let's unlock this phone. Now it sounds decent. Well, as good as this is going to sound. So one other thought I had, instead of this 7805, what if I just tie a USB charger directly into the AC in here? I mean, this is never going to be run on batteries anyway. Long term, a 5 volt to 5 volt DC converter power supply like those little isolators would work, because then it has an isolated ground coming out of it. But that's like 2 months of waiting for it to come here from China. So I'm going to try the separate power supply. Alright, here's the mess. 4.5 volt supply. It's about 7 volts unloaded. It's about 6 volts with this little USB or Bluetooth plugged into it. And I have that all powered. And let's see what it sounds like. No noise at all. Let's try and turn the volume up a little here. Now that's at half. This is about the maximum you go on this cheap boombox, right about there. Because it's a very, these cheap ones have a very loud volume. And you can hear how loud that is, so I think that's fine. Only problem is having a separate power supply means the motor power source, or this little switch here. Oh wait, hold on. I can just repurpose this play switch to switch the power going to here. And I can isolate this ground, and I can still have a 7805, and I can use whatever power supply I want going through this. Okay. Alright, forgot to shoot a bunch of video while I was doing this, so here's a summary. Red is the main power, goes through this play switch, and then pink is the play switch power feed, which normally goes on to the pin here on the motor. So I just pulled that off. This is the signal that goes and turns on the amplifier and the radio when the play switch is pressed, because otherwise it's off. And I just pulled power off of there, disconnected it from the motor, that thing's loud and awful, and ran it to the input of a 7805 linear voltage regulator. Just pulled this out of some scrap. Now the ground is going to the motor, and it also pigtails to a little ring terminal that ties to this chassis here. So the ground supply from the, this is about 10 volts or so, is where I'm using the back of this regulator to ground. And then this is the 5 volt, this green is 5 volt, and this white is ground supply that goes up over to the Bluetooth adapter. And let me just flip this over and show what I did on the top here. So where we left off, I removed the USB and just hooked power and ground to where the USB power header was. I removed the 3.5-inch audio jack and just soldered some audio cable directly to it. And I just salvaged that audio cable from the audio head here. I completely unplugged it and removed it. It's useful, and this thing's never going to play again. And I ran that. Originally I was going to just run it to the feed coming from the audio head, but that is way too hot on this radio, so rather than trying to mess with that, I then tried just finding where the audio goes through. So here's your volume, here's your balance control, and those little pins back there go to the equalizer. And from the equalizer they go to this switch, which is the radio tape switch. So I was able to find where the audio for the tape section comes from, and then just find a ground here and tack it in. And that horrible destruction on the trace that you see there is because there was still some noise coming from the amplifier for the tape head. So I just destructively removed those traces, so it's only this being fed into the amp. Now the downside with this is this has a lot of noise, and it's the power going into this, it's just creating a bunch of noise on the power supply for the rest of the radio, the amplifier. I've ordered a 5 volt to 5 volt isolator, like a 5 volt to 5 volt DC supply / isolator, but it'll be a while before it comes in. I want to see if that'll help. I'm going to use that probably after the 7805. So I'll feed the power, these 2 wires, into the isolator and then up to the Bluetooth. But if you have the volume turned up on your phone or whatever's connected here, it drowns out the noise pretty good. It's only between songs that you really hear it. In behind here, you can see I've notched this part of the little tuning dial. What I did is I put a little divider, filled it with some hot glue, hot snot, and then just a little bit of glue here is holding the circuit board in place. And if I flip this around and look at the back side here, or the front side, you can see that little translucent rectangle, and the tuning dial is the hot glue, and that lights up blue from the LED. And the tuning indicator gets nowhere near there, so it's still fine. The only downside is with some light, kind of hard to see. You can see a bit of circuit board, but I mean, that's with all these shop lights. In normal circumstances, you barely notice it. And so here's the front. And all I have to do is press play. That power's on. You hear that hum.
Power on.
That's coming from the Bluetooth and that beeping. So you start to hear all the noise from the Bluetooth radio.
Paired.
Get a nice Bluetooth indicator up there. I'm not a fan of the VU meters that are tied directly to the speakers, because then depending on how much bass is coming through, and like, these are real cheap, so they really only respond to the... If you have a more high frequencies than low, this will barely move. If you have tons of low frequencies, even though the loudness isn't that high, this will just go crazy, which is typical of these really cheap ones. I like the VU meters that are tied more at line level, so it doesn't matter how loud I'm listening to this, I get the nice effect. Here, I'll put on some music and show you my complaint. So that's a reasonable volume and it's barely moving. But if I crank it, and then it moves. I played around with changing, there's like a voltage divider, well, not even a voltage divider, it's just a resistor to ground on the input here. And I played with the value a bit, and it's better for some songs, but then other songs are just overloaded if they have more low end, so I just left it as is. Stupid 4-band graphic equalizer. You can't make a V with an even number of sliders. It just doesn't work. And with a cheap thing like this, you really have to make the V to make it sound anywhere halfway decent. I mean, it sounds surprisingly clear with the Bluetooth compared to just like the radio is awful. Ugh, and that's especially bad. But the radio sounds bad. I never really got the tape player working. Mechanism's real cheap and it's all bent out of shape. What would be nice and what I might look at doing in the future is you can order these. I ordered these years ago, and since then there's been a lot better ones on the market for around the same price. So this is just another one of what I put inside here. But you can get ones that'll actually have some little GPIO pins on there, so you can tie in switches to like next song, previous song, volume control. So I could put little switches for skipping songs into here because this has a cue function. So if I can get these, if I can mount little push button switches or something where these arms move up in the back, then I could make it skip songs. For now it's just simple on off. Now the Bluetooth is off, but the radio's still on. Ugh. Yeah, we're just not going to listen to that. But yeah, you can have the Bluetooth on with the radio on or off, but you'll only hear Bluetooth when you're on the tape. Oh look, a 5 volt isolated regulator. What luck. This is a Recom RFM 0505S. It's a 200 milliamp current capability, which is fine for what I'm using because I think that's about 60 milliamp I measured. And you can see the pin out here, so one's marked, and you have your in and your out, and it's got isolated negative pins for the voltage in and voltage out, which is what I'm looking for. So both of these are isolated from each other. And you can see working your way in, it goes negative, positive, negative, positive. So what I can do is I can tack this on to the 7805 and then move the wires from the 7805 here. Won't really have any physical mounting other than the solder, but I haven't really been doing things the proper way so far anyway, so whatever. Oh yeah! This is not the recommended way to hook this up. So I marked, because I had to flip this upside down, that little marking there is pin 1. So V in negative comes from the ground pin, the center pin on the 7805. And then V in positive comes from the output pin of the 7805. Then it repeats with voltage out negative, which is this white wire, and voltage out positive, the green wire. And then I'm going to meter this out to see how good this is, but this is how I'm providing ground. There's this ground pin here that tees off the motor, goes on to this chassis, and then the back of this regulator. Let's see how it sounds. Oh yeah, this appears to work a lot better now. So this is kind of a good listening volume, slightly less than a quarter. But let me just crank it up to nearly half so you can hear. And even then, you can hear a bit of noise, but it's not nearly as bad. So this is just the hiss from the amplifier.
Power on.
Oof, from the amplifier. So that's cranked on this.
Paired.
See how loud that is? And at that listening volume, there's no noise at all. So I highly recommend using one of those 5 volt to 5 volt converters. They're like $1. I think I paid $1.50 maybe, or thereabouts. If you're willing to wait and order them overseas, they're even cheaper, like less than $1. And it cleans the noise up nicely. So the 7805 regulator and the 5 volt converter tied together It's just perfect. And that's it. If you guys have any extra suggestions or anything, let me know.
To